Oh, give me a second. My mouse doesn't want to work when I have this in full screen mode.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Okay.
This is about us first. I want to first of all tell Vicki, thank you very much for allowing us to do this through Zoom. We really wanted to do it in person, but I am immune challenged and I just didn't think it would be a good idea for me to come in. So anyway, I'm Rose Klix, founder of Poetry Society of Tennessee Northeast. We affectionately call ourselves PST-NE. Our chapter is based in Johnson City, Tennessee.
And I'm Lisa Kamolnick. I am PST-NE's Vice President of Communications. And today, Rose and I are going to put on our judge and editor hats, as well as our writer hats, to share information about how you might submit the best entries or submissions, depending on what your goals are, to reach your goals. And I think Vicki emailed these out, but if not, we'll be sure that we share with you a few handouts.
And we'll provide our experiences with what judges and editors want to enable them to choose winners and or publish works from what may seem like a mountain of submissions.
I've just recently jumped into the role of contest judge for Poetry Society of Tennessee and the National Federation of State Poetry Societies, which are kind of parent organizations to our chapter. And I can tell you that my first contest didn't have very many entries, but it kind of felt a little like a mountain.
And I've often judged contests that I've sponsored, also a challenging chapbook contest for another state's organization. I also submitted my own work, to poetry and prose competitions within writers groups as well as other markets.
Now, I've been focusing on poetry right now, and I did a little bit of creative prose and creative nonfiction way back when, but I'm not completely without experience. My first role in the defense industry was as a technical editor, and I discovered as I've entered into this area of creative fiction that some of the tasks that I did as a technical editor matched up pretty well with what a fiction editor would be looking for. I also spent quite a bit of years writing proposals and press releases. And what I discovered there is that the processes are very similar. For example, anyone here today who has submitted something may find this familiar. The defense contract industry works, as the name suggests, day to day by contracts, and they receive invitations for bid. Sound familiar? They have to put their proposals together and get them in by a specified deadline. Within the proposal, they have a lot of very specific criteria that they have to meet. And if they don't meet the deadline, their package doesn't even get opened. If they don't meet those criteria, they aren't under consideration. Now, what happens in-house when you get a request for proposal is a team is pulled together that has different skill sets to answer questions that solve the problem that the customer brings. And the magic of it and the fun that I had writing the proposals was when everyone came together and we figured out what was needed and we knew what kind of requirements we had to meet to get it in the door, including the deadline. But we crafted a story that told the customer how we would solve their problem and helped us stand out to win that proposal. That was the really exciting part for me. And I'm sure that if you've submitted anything, that's what you're trying to do when you submit your work. In addition, when I did press releases, it was kind of like doing a blast out to different markets. We had to decide what media did we need to target and what kind of things did we need to do to make our press release stand out over others so that we would be in the field of consideration. I also have done a little bit of video script writing and some copywriting, both for in-house use and for external use. And at the end of the day, all of these different forms of writing, you're going to be writing for your market.
Well, that's very true, Lisa. In fact, you've shared a lot today that reminds me of what I did for the government also. I was on the other side. I was the contracting officer or the contracting specialist. And then I worked my way up to being a procurement analyst. So I understand you had to have certain rules and regulations to follow. But before we get started, we kind of wanted to get a feel for the room. So maybe Vicki can help us kind of get an idea of how many here are poets, whether it's just once in a while or whatever. Got any ideas, Vicki? Can you tell it from the room how many people are have done poetry?
We have 8 people here today.
Okay, and they've all been doing some poetry.
How many have done poetry? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the
Oh.
8.
Well, that's a good number. And then how many are just strictly prose? So is that just the other 2 or?
No, I think that probably includes all of the 8.
All 8.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that gives us an idea that we do have a little bit of a mixture. We, we're in addition to talking about what judges and editors want, we also will share some places to look for opportunities to submit both poetry and prose.
And we'd love to hear your ideas too. When we get into the Q&A and discussion section, I think that's one of the beauty of all of our writing communities in this area. We really do help each other.
But first, a teensy commercial about PST-NE and our state and national affiliations. They provide even more opportunities for submitting poetry. The Poetry Society of Tennessee, which is just PST, is our parent chapter at the state level. And the National Federation of State Poetry Societies, we like to call them NFSPS. You get tested on that when you first join. No, I'm just kidding. It's the next level. Just like it sounds, it is the national level with other state societies.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our chapter. We are first and foremost, and you'll see the word community bolded because I think community is so powerful. We are a community of both poets and poetry lovers. Not all of our members write poetry. Some read and appreciate it. Rose, did you have anything to add on that one?
Well, yeah, not all of our member poets are accomplished poets, and some just enjoy being part of the poetry share.
That's true. Now, we like to say that we build community and we pursue excellence. So for those of our poets who are looking to improve their craft, we try to provide really good resources for them to meet their personal goals. We also like to promote poetry and poets, and we have some astounding poets in our community right now, and I sometimes have a really busy job keeping up promoting their publications.
But don't get intimidated. We welcome poets at all levels, whether they want to compete in contests, become published, or just enjoy the poetry.
That's very true. When I was in my business careers, I didn't have a lot of time for creative writing, and so it didn't happen. And when I got into the Poetry Society back in 2019, I had forgotten a lot of what I'd learned, and I really did feel kind of like a nervous newbie. And the group was just really welcoming to me, and everything that I've experienced in the group has made me a better writer and helped me achieve some important writing goals. So looking over to the right-hand corner, the right-hand column, what we do, we meet monthly. Our meetings usually include some sort of program or workshop, a very brief business meeting, and we do keep it very brief, and a poetry share. Our educational programs and workshops are led by educators and experienced poets. They sometimes are strictly an educational program, sometimes they're a workshop in which you get a little bit of education, and sometimes they're a hybrid. Our vice president of programs does an excellent job of lining up the programs to meet the needs and interests of our group. And I can't say enough good things about the programs that we've had lately. I have walked away with things that I could take immediately into my work. And when there's a writing element, I sometimes leave with some work completed.
That's great. And then the next one is critique groups. Currently, we have 3 critique groups that provide more assistance to help us polish our poetry.
I am currently all about the critique groups. I'm in 2 of the 3, and if I can, I'll join another one. The group members are kind of part reader, part editor, and part audience. And not only do we take a serious look at each other's works, but we actually have become friends.
And I believe that's true too. I've been part of the groups as well.
Yeah, we miss you.
Sorry. The poetry shares. My favorite is the poetry share, the close of the monthly meeting, and public readings, because we hear directly from the poets about their poems, or a reading from a favorite published poet that they have discovered recently.
Rose, I also like the poetry shares, and one of my favorite parts is when a new member or someone who hasn't shared before joins in.
And contests and community outreach. We have done some outreach before COVID when we have been in the community, and we've sponsored contests in our local area as well as those in the state. And some of the community activities like the Appalachian Fairgrounds in Gray, Tennessee. We've sponsored some contests there. So I think unless you have something else to add, Lisa, I think we can go on to the next slide.
Okay, we'll move on. All right, so we're gonna take a little bit more time with critique groups, I guess.
And I wanted you to look at the pictures because see, particularly the bottom left corner one, you can see me and Harvey Stone laughing about something or other that we were talking about with the critique group. And the other ones, you can see that we're just casual. And Howard looks very, very serious. He's up in the upper right-hand corner. So we're all about all 3 of those things, and it works.
It does, kind of like poetry itself.
There you go.
So I'll spend just a little bit more time, if I may, on the critique groups, because there's 2 elements to it that I think that you could probably relate to. One is just that you have these friendships that develop in them and you get support for what you're doing. And it's not just support for your work. And a lot of times, you know, the work can be kind of hard. You might be working through difficult material, or you might be stuck somewhere, and they can help you get unstuck. But they also are there to celebrate when you have awards, or to help you through big disappointments, and also just to be there for whatever's going on in your life. And I just really love how tight-knit our critique groups have been, and I hope that you also have had an opportunity to have that experience. I've learned a lot, you know, and I turn to look at the craft itself, and our critique groups are made up of anyone from beginner to very experienced poets, and every single one of them have had some input to my work that has made a difference. I know that my work has received awards in the past because of feedback that I got from them, and I love that I've been able to return the favor. As writers, you know, it's not always so easy to find those right words, or we know what's in our mind, but we're not quite sure if what we wanted to say has come across. And one of the things when we were preparing this presentation that Rose and I talked about was the power of reading aloud. And it was just kind of funny. Last Thursday, we were sitting in a Law State Writers Guild meeting, and an author had the very same thing to say. Do you read your work out loud? Because you hear so much when you say it out loud, whether it's a typo or some tone thing just doesn't quite work. And in our critique groups, we kind of, in my mind, we kind of take it a step further because we read each other's work, and it's usually a cold read. So you immediately can hear what's not coming across, or if you have a line break that didn't work, or if you have a typo thrown in there. And then you get the feedback as well, which helps you understand what's not coming across properly, or what's really working, or if there's other issues that you need to consider. And as reviewers, we're kind, but we're not shy.
There you go. And I just wanted to add to that a moment too, is when I first set up the critique group, I've been in some really nasty critique groups over the years before we set up, and I don't mean part of the Johnson City group, but other places that I have lived. And so I set it up to begin with that we would start off with the cold read, where somebody else would read out loud the poem, and then we can hear it from somebody else, and we can hear where they stumbled on some words or the line breaks or whatever. And then we go around and we say what worked for us for that particular poem. And because we're giving positive feedback to begin with, I think that works better, because then when we lead into working on what it is that did not work for us, because it just didn't quite ring true, we just didn't quite follow it or whatever, I think then you are more able to react to it. So, but again, we don't want you to feel intimidated about joining us. And remember that it's always still your poem. You can decide to use those suggestions, or you can decide that you want to take it in a little bit different direction. So it's always your poem. And so these critique groups, again, gently let you know what works well. And if there need to be corrections to those typos or those punctuations, hey, we're all human. Or maybe the lines just don't quite make sense. Or as we say, that line didn't work for me.
And I love to hear that line as well as that line worked for me, because I know something good's going to happen after I hear them. Well, we'd love for you to join us if you have an interest in poetry. Our membership year runs from May through April, and you can join any time of year, but obviously getting in early gives you the biggest benefit. Although I will tell you that we record most of our programs, so you would have the opportunity to get exclusive links to those replays if you were to join as a member, starting from whenever we had to start recording for COVID, whenever we started the COVID meeting. So it's into last year. We are going to continue Zoom meetings through the end of this year right now, unless something changes, but we will continue to do a hybrid Zoom format and in person. So if you're not local, you could still participate. And we are very much looking forward to the day when we can meet in person again.
Absolutely. And I wanted to let you know that Lisa also has done a wonderful job of managing our Facebook page with lots and lots and lots of suggestions for poetry writing and encouragement to enter specific upcoming contests. That helps you to plan ahead. And she manages our blog.
Oh, thanks, Rose. And we also started an Instagram account this spring, and that's been going pretty well. And this year, one of the shifts that I made was to promote our members on Facebook and Instagram when they're published. And I've said earlier, they keep me pretty busy because they're rather prolific, some of them. And I love supporting them this way. I'm hoping that new people will discover their work. One more thing I wanted to mention. If you want to know what we're up to, if you're not quite ready to join us, we're happy to invite you to a meeting. Just let us know if you'd like to attend one. And you can always sign up for our newsletter. We put out no more than, say, 14, probably more like a dozen, because we don't usually put out bonus issues during the year. And just let us know by emailing us. And I've put our email address in the chat, and ask to subscribe, or you can just put your name into the chat and put newsletter next to it. And I believe that Carrie's going to save the chat, so I'll have that information before we leave today. Okay.
Great.
Rose.
Yeah, good writing. That's what judges and editors want. Oh, did I skip ahead?
No, that's okay. They do want good writing.
Anyway, we'll be glad to answer any of your questions about PST-NE later. But now let's get to this program.
All right, that sounds great, Rose. And you said it. They want good writing. So I know all of you have got to be good writers out there. So I guess our work is done here. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Oh, wait, Lisa. I don't think we're done
You're not
yet.
gonna let me get away with that, huh?
How do you know whether or not there's good writing here? So how do you know you've achieved it? What sets your work apart from other people's entries? And I think,
Okay. Shall we get down to the details on slide 8 with what the
Yes.
judges and editors are looking for?
yes, ma'am. The first thing is it well executed? Think of your submissions like a resume for your work. When you submit your work, it is applying for a job to be a winner and or published. Show the judge or editor that you know the grammar and punctuation rules, demonstrate your mastery of techniques, and impress them with your creativity.
Well, sometimes poets break those rules. I know I do that sometimes, or even make up their own.
Yeah, but they need to know when it's okay to break them.
Well, that's a good plan. I guess you would say be wisely creative.
Yeah, that sounds like a good term. And I wanted to share a story with you. When I judged one contest where the sponsor had set out in the rules that she did not want poems without punctuation or capitalization. I struggled with this rule, not because I didn't like the rule, but because one of the poems the coordinator had sent me stood out above all the rest. And guess what? It consistently had no punctuation. And that's the that's the clue too, is that when you're looking at these poems and it's sometimes punctuation and sometimes not, you really need to be consistent. If you're not going to do punctuation, then don't do punctuation. If you're going to do punctuation, then please get it all in there and show us what that's all about. See if I can get back to my spot here. Anyway, so I contacted the contest coordinator and I asked if I could still award to this poem. I explained to her the situation. And she basically said, you are the judge. So I was empowered. And the poet's adherence to the minute form rules was perfect. And the minute form does not say that you, which is what the format was. And it does not say that you have to have punctuation and capitalization. And so the poet's message, it was so loving and poignant. And it just, I guess made me tingle. And that's not tingle. Anyway, tingle. I did award that poem first place. Anyway.
I like that story, Rose. It makes me think about a few things. First, great advice that if you're gonna pick a way of writing, stay consistent with it throughout. I think that speaks to tone. And also, there's a lot of things to consider about the judge themselves. They may have certain constraints that they're working to, and they may have certain freedoms that they have to select a particular work. I also think the poem itself that you talked about is a great example of maybe breaking the rule, so to speak, with purpose. If you're going to break a rule, make sure that it is enhancing your work and not something that you did because you don't really know what you're doing, which is one of my biggest fears when I'm working with new forms, or because you have a typo in it or something like that. I think we've said this before, and we're probably going to say it a few more times. If you read your work out loud, a lot of times those kinds of things will jump out at you, or if you have others read. And if you don't have time or you don't have the ability for someone to read out loud, you might get some written feedback as well. And I know that within our critique group, when we're getting close to important submissions, sometimes we email things back and forth and we get a lot of good feedback that way. And again, as Rose mentioned earlier, it's your poem, it's your work. You can decide if and how you might want to use that. So let's talk a little bit about things that fit within style and tone of the contest or publication. You can probably tell by now that I kind of like the creative process and I love the critique process. What freaks me out right now is all of those publications. It's like, it's like a needle in a haystack. How do you find the right ones for you? For me, assuming that I can meet the deadline, and that's a whole nother story, the most important questions that I'm trying to answer are, does my work fit within the style and tone of that contest or that publication? But also, does that contest or publication fit with the goals that I'm trying to achieve? And this requires homework. I look at the contest or the publication's past works, maybe look at what the rules said were required, if you have the ability to look back that way, and what poems were actually selected to see if they're consistent or if there's a little play there. For contests, sometimes you don't always know, but a lot of times they end up with anthologies. And last year, Rose gave me a couple of anthologies for some of the society contests I was looking to enter, and it was so helpful.
Oh, well, I'm glad that it helped you, Lisa. You've been doing quite well. But keep in mind that there are lots and lots of others works being submitted. The judge and or editor selects from a huge pile. And this was brought to light for me when I submitted 3 poems to the Sow's Ear Journal Contest. I received a cherished rejection slip. She said she liked one of those poems, but was sorry she couldn't accept it. She explained she considered 17,000 entries. I was amazed she even had time enough to tell me this.
Oh, I love that story. There's a couple of things here that jump out at me. One is just the sheer volume of work that judges and editors have to pour through for some contests. And I do think that your poem must have had a great deal of merit for her to take the time when there were that many entries. And it also maybe speaks to sometimes the constraints that editors and judges are looking for. I think it was you, Rose, that once told me that a chapbook, when you put together your poems into a chapbook, it should kind of turn into a whole poem in itself. So it's got this thread running through it that makes sense. And I think often editors in particular, when they're putting an issue together, they're looking for those threads. And sometimes yours just doesn't happen to fit the threads that they've come up with when they're trying to publish. Personally, I still haven't put anything out yet that hits that 17,000 mark. And I'm hoping someday soon to get one of those cherished rejection slips or maybe even an acceptance. That would be amazing. But for right now, I've been focusing on the Poetry Society contest, especially the ones that are members only, because they're a small field. It felt for me at the very beginning like the most manageable place to start. It kind of reduced the overwhelm that I had. And also I could get a little bit of intel on the judges, so I could understand a little bit more what they were looking for. And that really helped me to gain my confidence. Now, another aspect of this, and I'm going to go back to that proposal story I told at the beginning about how there were certain things that we had to do, or maybe certain file formats and certain number of copies that we had to put together in those proposal packages in order to be considered. And it's the same thing for any kind of contest or publication that you're submitting to. And I'm not going to go much more into detail here. I'll dive in a little bit later, but let's just say that for me, I think of this as getting it right to unlock the consideration door.
That's very good advice. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about that it contains the X factor that grabs the attention and speaks to the subjective preferences of a judge or editor. There's always a subjective factor. Keep that in mind as well. And what is that X factor? It's that moment a work makes the judge or editor go, wow. So just because you don't win a contest or get published, it doesn't mean that it's not good. Just clean it up, keep trying, find another place to submit.
That's good advice too, Rose. And I think now this isn't quite apples to apples because this wasn't the same piece, but I know a writer who tried to get into a prestigious journal for 14 years before succeeding. The idea is kind of the same. If it doesn't work the first time, as a very good friend of mine once said, who did a lot of fundraising and was pretty successful at it, don't change your goal, change your plan.
That's very good advice too. Thank you for sharing that with us.
So how do judges and editors assess all of those entries that they get? What
Okay.
kind of tools do they use? I've learned that some judges and editors are kind of like those writers who are pantsers. I bet a few of you might be pantsers in this room, and sometimes I am. And others use very involved written criteria to score their submissions. Now, I have used those rubrics that have been provided to me. I've created my own as well as a judge, and I found that either way it works for me. The other thing that's important to consider is that you may be able to know who an editor is. When you're in a contest, you're not necessarily going to know who the judge is or what their criteria are. And you may not, even though you know the editor, know exactly what their criteria are, but you can do some research. You can look at what kind of work they write or what other kinds of poems they've selected in previous contests, that kind of thing. And that can help your odds, or it may make you decide that you don't want to enter that contest or submit to that publication.
That's very true. So in your handouts, you'll find an example of Russell Strauss's judging criteria. Let me tell you just a few minutes about Russell Strauss. He served as an NFSPS president as well as a past president of PST. And for several months before the NFSPS deadline, he provides what he calls Russell's challenges for members to write for specific contests, so that again, you can look ahead and decide whether you want to try that form out before the deadline looms on you, and maybe you can get a better action from out of it. And this helps poets to plan ahead, which is always a hard thing to do when there's so many things that are showing up, but they don't give you very much time. And then the judge and the editor often uses their knowledge of the accepted rules. And of course, there's always that X factor that we talked about earlier. So I want to share another story with you about judging. And it was a theme of homemade. And I was faced with well over half of the entries talking about their grandma or mother's special baked cookies. Not only was I bored reading maybe 35 cookie entries, but they were almost like they followed a cookie cutter. None of them stood out with a meaningful theme. Yes, I know that love comes from food sometimes, but that's not a unique thought or a unique twist.
Yeah. Besides getting hungry, I'm kind of feeling how hard that must have been to get 35 almost exact entries. I know for me as a judge, while I'm discovering all, and one of my favorite things is that first run through of all the poems, because I don't know what I'm going to get. And I get these yeses and nos and maybes, and then the wow moment hits me, and it's like a full body yes. It's a poem that takes my breath away, or it gives me chills, or brings me to tears, or makes me laugh, like a really gut laugh. But it always makes me think about it long after I've read it. So we've talked a little bit now about some things we can know and some things we can't know. And I think we've covered just about all of these bullets, but we're going to go back through them, make sure that we've told you everything that we'd like to say, and maybe dive deeper on a few of them. Now, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you discover it as you go through the process. But and sometimes you just can't know some things, you don't know. And those things that you do know are what you really should focus on. I know for me, that is what I try to do, is nail the knowable. I hate when I do the work and I submit it, and then I realize after the fact that I've left something out or not done something that was totally under my control. That is the worst feeling in the world. So that is why I look really hard at the guidelines and acceptance criteria. And I try to keep a checklist so that I don't get lost and lose my way. It's that simple. And it's also that complicated, because it seems like every contest and every publication has some different idea of what the guidelines are. So you have to really pay attention to each and every one of them. You might have to get the font right. There may be a certain file format you have to submit. There may even be a limit to the bio that they want, if they want a bio. But there's other things that you want to keep in mind too. Like if a publication tells you, hey, we only do left justified poems, probably not a good idea to take that poem where you've got weird formatting and send it in. If a publication leans traditional, probably not a good idea, even if you're doing it to show how much range you have, to put in a piece that's automatic writing. That's just going to irritate them. When it comes to style, tone, and theme, we've talked about this before. Is your work a good fit? And does that work fit you? So let's say a publication or a contest says traditional sonnets, or there's a publication that says we don't accept any writing, or when you read it, you can see that they don't take any writing that doesn't include metaphor. Take that on face value. They mean that. Look to those publications to see if there actually is any play in what the guidelines are that they say. And it's also important to make sure that your needs are met. What is the reputation of that particular contest or publication? What is the quality of it? What other aspects are there about that contest or that publication that might fit in with your goals? Does it fit? Do you fit them? And does it fit with your goals?
Very good. And so know what good looks like. I know we're all writers here, and you probably know what I'm talking about. We know what good looks like. You read other people's work, and you know which ones you like best because it's well crafted. But know your genre and know your craft. Put your best work forward. Consider beta readers and critique groups and other methodologies to get your work in its best state. For example, poetry contests often have formal forms, subject themes, and any subject, any form contests. Now, any subject, any form contests tend to attract a lot more entries. Many poets interpret this to mean they should enter free verse. Well, free verse is a form of its own. That's true. It is a form, but it's not the same as any form. It's difficult to judge forms against free verse. Even then, imperfect forms are often dumped there because they didn't win any previous form contest. However, if it looks like a sonnet by line and rhyme scheme, but it isn't perfectly executed, then the any judge will probably throw it out.
Yes, I heard that directly from another judge and someone who's really big in NFSPS, Bud Mahan, at a recent conference. And honestly, I would judge that way too. You should always, to the degree that you can know, submit your best work. Now, we've said this several times too. You can't always know who the judge or editor is, and you should research if you can find out. And consider if you've got anything that fits. So I want to share another PST story here. Florence Bruce is one of Poetry Society of Tennessee's poetic form experts. And she has a blog spot that she keeps. I keep it bookmarked. So whenever I run across a theme I'm not familiar, or a form I'm not familiar with, I go and try to check it out there. She provides the rules for the form and has at least one example. And through my critique group, I learned that she is not just an expert in form, but as a judge, she is a stickler for form. So whenever she is a judge, if I've decided to enter that, I work really hard to get that form correct. And at the same time that I'm trying to develop what I hope will be compelling content.
And you're right, Florence is a tough judge. And another example, this is when I entered a blank verse narrative contest, and I'm not a very good iambic pentameter type poet. And so I struggle with that, and I tried really hard to meet the form. And when the results came out, I noticed that Lisa's poem won first place, and mine had the only honorable mention. There wasn't any second place, there wasn't any third place, there weren't any first, second, and third honorable mentions. It was just Lisa's poem that absolutely must have hit the target very well, and my honorable mention. So I contacted Florence. I've communicated with her over the years. She's in Memphis area, and asked her what I did wrong. I thought maybe it was just a little something, because she did give me an honorable mention. Well, Florence told me what was wrong with it. She told me what should have been fixed. And so I felt very lucky that she'd even given me the honorable mention.
Well, and Rose, I'm sure that your poem had a great deal of merit for her to do that, because you and I both know that she's been known to practically not award anything in the past. I was really surprised that I placed in that contest. When I did the form, I just kind of threw it out there. That was what I would call maybe not a moonshot, but a rocket test. And I worked really hard to get the meter right on it. But I will say that I took this one to the critique group, and they pointed out some narrative issues to me where things just weren't working. And if I hadn't have been able to get that feedback and make the changes that I made, I'm sure my poem would have just been sitting in the reject pile. And Rose, you might have been the only one with any kind of recognition at that point in time without, and it was all because I got their feedback. I don't think it would have happened without their feedback.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm glad that that worked for you. The competition. We kind of touched on this before, but you can't always know how much or how hard the competition will be. But consider the venue and the scale. Remember when I told you about Sow's Ears judging 17,000 entries? Researching past winners and their work can help determine if you want to enter there too. And be patient. This is not my long suit. I'm not a patient person, but that's something that you would have to do because contests and journals take a very long time to respond, even by electronic contacts back to you.
That's true. Now, some actually do have pretty quick turnarounds, but most of them do take a long time to respond. But if you're impatient, and I will tell you, Rose, that I'm told all the time by my husband that I am impatient too. Or how about we just say, if you're efficient, you can do simultaneous submissions.
Well, it used to be an unwritten rule. Do not send some simultaneous submissions. Back then, you submitted and you waited and waited and waited for decisions. Now, simultaneous entries are often acceptable, but you must keep good records. And if the one you want to enter doesn't accept simultaneous submissions, then don't submit it elsewhere unless you contact the first ones to withdraw the poem in a timely manner. We had a situation for a PST contest when a contestant was announced as a first place winner. She informed us later on that the poem was published elsewhere from a publication she'd apparently forgotten about. The rules clearly said we don't allow published poems except in one category. Fortunately, the second place winning poem was still available. This was important because the first place poems are published in the annual Tennessee Voices anthology several months later.
Wow, so I heard a couple of things there, Rose. One is the importance of keeping track of your simultaneous submissions. And I do that a little bit. And I know I'm always worried. I like keep double records practically because I do not want to ever be in that position that PST found in this situation. The other is also that I don't think we've talked about the fact that sometimes when you win poems in contests, you get published in anthologies and you need to be patient waiting for those publications to come out too. Now, if you don't win or you don't succeed, then as they say, try again and again and again. You think about that story of my friend who tried for 14 years to get in a publication. Generally, it really just means submitting your work elsewhere. And you could retry a contest. There's a woman that I know, she spoke at the NFSPS and she said that she gives her, and just for a little more background, the NFSPS has different judges pretty much for their individual contests every year. And some of the contest themes repeat. She retries 5 years. She'll rework her poem if it doesn't place and try it again before she gives up on it. And in terms of publications, a lot of people I know just keep a list of where they want to submit next if they're not doing simultaneous.
Well, and also reread your work and study the next market. Be sure you've totally scrubbed your work's little face before sending it off again. For contests, you can read previously awarded works. Often the contests recycle these themes, like Lisa said, or the forms in out years. If they use the same judges, then don't resubmit to the same poem to the same judge. They have memories, they probably would recognize it, and they might just set it aside and not realize you've made some changes to it. I think we've already mentioned this, but read the journal, magazine, other published works by that contest or publication. Research the editors or judges if publicized. What do they like to award and or publish? And look at samples of their own work.
Now, that's a great idea. So we've talked a little bit about what judges and editors are looking for and how that might play out in the process of submitting things. So let's take one more angle and unpack this list of things to consider with a mind to how we might plan for them.
Well, the plan is to know the basics. That's first, and the very first bullet is deadline. And in my opinion, deadline is the most important thing to consider. Give yourself enough time to prepare your best work. Do they have a similar request for works each month or each year? Plan ahead and don't rush to get it in the mail.
I totally agree with you on that, Rose. Deadline. I like to get right on the end of a deadline because that really pushes me to get work done. And sometimes I've pushed it a little bit too far and you pay for it in the end. So getting in front of it is really important. The other thing is genre. I mean, we've talked a lot about poetry here, me especially, because that's my area that I'm interested in. But we know that there are certain rules and considerations for whatever genre you're working in and whatever subgenre or individual element of fiction that you may be interested in. And also, many of you, it sounds like, write poetry and prose. So there's lots of different rules that you need to be thinking about. So as you're looking at genre, be thinking about what are those considerations for each one of those? What's the aspects within each of them?
And I think that that's what AAG and Lost State Writers Guild and others have been providing to us with their programs. I've learned a lot about specific genres at meetings and workshops.
That's a great point, Rose. I know that I'm certainly learning more about different genres because of all the meetings that I've been attending there. Now, style is another one, and I'm going to kind of link this into market. You know, are you clear about what they want? Does your work fit?
Very good. And the next one is only unpublished. Well, is previously published okay? I would say no. Usually both contests and publications want unpublished, original work. If it appears on a website or social media, that is usually considered published. And then there's the quantity and the length. In addition, their rules always state what quantity or length they want. Example is the maximum word count, and sometimes also the minimum. So keep within their range. And the form, we've been referring to poetry forms, but there are other forms to consider in prose like flash fiction, short story, or essay.
And I've recently seen some calls for submissions for novel chapters, story collections, book reviews, and scripts.
Yeah. Competition, we kind of touched on this too. Some publications and contests will have a whole lot of submissions than other ones. Keep in mind too, for contests, if the prize money is really high, your competition level went way up. So consider not shooting for the moon until you've established yourself as a writer. Submit to lesser known markets to build your confidence level.
I think that I mentioned this earlier too, but just in case, as I began submitting my work, I started with the Poetry Society of Tennessee members only contest. And now I've branched out to some of the national level society contests and other contests and regional publications. And I've done a few things that hit a little bit bigger market. And so far that's gone well for me. If you are a new or fairly unknown writer, another good opportunity that I picked up from Authors Publish is to submit to a publication that does blind readings, blind reviews, and contests, of course, are normally blind reviews as well. And that kind of review can often level the playing field for us lesser known and new writers.
Very good. In case you don't know, blind means the entry or submission shows no writer ID on the entries. That way the judge or editor does not know the name or the poet or the author.
And I would say also, just going back to that Authors Published article, the author said that when she worked as an editor for a journal that did blind reviews, that she sometimes selected the work of unknown authors over well-known ones. So definitely eliminating that name factor and that bias that might come from knowing a name and judging the work, it does exist and does happen if you submit to that kind of a journal. So let's talk a little bit about money now. We know that some publications don't have reading fees and some do, and some contests, in fact, most contests have fees and some don't, but not all of them. So you do have money coming into consideration here because it is, I guess you could say, an investment that you're making in your work. And I don't mind paying the fees as long as they look like a legitimate operation, because I know that they're supporting the contest or they're supporting that journal or publication, but I do want to spend wisely. And that's where that submission strategy comes in, of that balance of do you fit them and do they fit you? So always when you're doing your planning and you're looking at what these opportunities are, assess what you're doing in terms of writing for the market and how you're working toward meaningful goals.
Also, I'd suggest that you consider entering contests that offer the entrant a subscription for the reading fee. That's a great way to have the journals or magazine delivered to you so you can examine the competition and the quality of the publications.
Yeah, Rose, I think that's a great idea. In fact, I entered a contest recently because it was going to be a free subscription with the entry fee, and I was going to subscribe anyway. So we'll see what happens with the contest, but that was a great, that was just made it kind of fun. And I think also that can be really helpful if they have an online version and a print version and you want to see what both of them look like. So I think that's a great idea. And let's talk just for a minute about how to submit. I can remember back when I was in college, there was one way to do it. It was self-addressed stamped envelope and you send it by mail. And nowadays, snail mail still around, but it's more for some of the contest and less for some of the journals that I've seen. But you might be submitting by submittable or email or some other online method. And so you kind of have to work through a little bit more complexity around submission. Whatever method you're looking at, be sure that you're following those guidelines to a T and take care with deadlines, especially snail mail, because you want to be sure if it is received by that you're getting it out in front of what the mail is doing. And right now, with mail being so unreliable, that becomes even more important. All right, so I think we've already kind of beaten a dead horse about the knowing who the judge or editor is and researching, but it's just a must-have for a plan.
And next is submitting to journal or anthologies. When submitting to a journal, or an anthology, consider if your work fits it. Again, we've kind of beat that to death, but and if it will help you meet your goals. You might answer these questions. Is the journal respected? Does it add to your publication credits? Does the journal target your desired audience or establish you as a certain type of writer? Anthologies. If you like someone's work or you write similarly to that person, research the person's publication listed in their bio, because your work also might fit in those publications.
That's a great idea, Rose.
And then we kind of want you to try and put the judge or editor's hat on while you're evaluating your own work. Think like them. They may be overwhelmed with many entries, so you want your work to sparkle.
Oh, I love that, sparkle. Look at that shiny object that they get distracted by. I like that. So here are just some things that you could consider as you put on your judge's hat or your editor's hat to look at your own work. And you can use them in a plan. You could make a template. You could create a checklist, however you might want to use them. But these are some of the things that certainly I look at, and I'm sure that Rose does too, when I'm trying to make sure I've hit everything that I need to hit before I hit the send button. Let's start with quantity. Can you send more than one piece of work? I know that the longer the forms get, the less likely you're going to be able to send more than one piece. It's very common in poetry that they're asking for 3 to 5, and that gives you the ability to show your range when you do. Many of you are working in multiple genres. Can you send different genres in a single submission? Do you have to pick a team? Do they only let you submit one submission and it has to be prose and a certain type of prose or poetry? And think about it, they usually have different editors on those, and that makes sense. So know how many pieces of work and what kind you can submit and build that into your template.
And then I wanted to address length. This is something else you need to consider, because if it's a 40-line entry and is going to NFSPS, know that they will count between the stanzas. So the blank spacing in between, they're counting that as part of your 40 lines. So there are maximum lengths for that, but there's also the character width, so that it fits between the margins when they publish it. And these criteria are so that when they do publish it, that hopefully it will be published in a format that is the way that the poet intended it. And then let's talk for a moment about form. We mentioned that earlier, that there are many specific poetic or playwriting or other prose form criteria.
Okay, and then let's get to some of the more technical kind of things. Many contests and publications specify what font type or size that you might use. They might even note whether you can do 1.5 spacing or single spacing. And they may have some very specific requirements about the file type or file format they're using, like it's only a Word document or a PDF, or it has to be an audio file. A couple of journals I recently submitted to said, oh, you can attach a PDF file, but we want the poems in the email itself.
Yeah, you just need to pay attention to what they want. And for blind readings or contests, you might have to do one blind copy and one with your name, or they may require you to fill out a list of your entries.
Right. And sometimes there's some structural features that are important. It might not be as important for prose writing unless you're doing some real experimental stuff. But one poetry journal that I submitted to said they prefer left justified only, and that if they accepted a poem that wasn't left justified, they reserve the right to put everything into left justified. So if your indentation is really important to you, probably not a good idea to submit to that particular journal. I've also seen journals say that they will not accept right justified work either. And most journals will require your work to be titled.
And titles are very important because they invite the reader into your work. Some forms, like the haiku, do not have a title. So if you need to list it, then use the first line of the poem. Some writing elements. We've already talked about the importance of getting things grammatically correct and matching style. Also be aware if a style guide, such as the Chicago Manual of Style, applies, and follow that style. Error free. Have you dotted your I's and crossed all your T's? And have you read it aloud and or listened while someone else read it to you?
Right. Now, when we look at genre, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. It's really just an example of how you might put together a laundry list of the things that you want to look at to suss out what you want to see beyond those technical requirements and dig a little bit better into what does good look like. When I put on my judge hat or my review hat for my own work and also for the work that I might be judging or critiquing, this is the kind of stuff that I look at. And also when I know who the judge is, if I know that they have a preference for certain types of elements, then I may focus more on those amongst all of that mix of poetic elements.
So now we're going to get to the opportunities that we found online, some of them that we've had experience with and some that we've thought might be interesting, but please do your own homework. But why enter contests? Because experience builds confidence and recognition, and it may net monetary awards or publication. And why submit to small journals and regional anthologies? And that's to build your credits. Especially for an older retired person like me. I dabbled in writing while I was working, and now I'm able to focus more fully on writing. We've given you a handout of contest and submission opportunities with links where available, and we'll just highlight a few. When I did some online research, I was shocked to discover that the Writer's Digest Annual Writers Market Guide is not being released for 2021 and may not in the future. And they have listed thousands of markets for writers for nearly 100 years. Their publications were sold to the public through the Penguin Random House in 2019. And I also noticed a message to subscribers that the website will be unavailable for the foreseeable future. But it looks like the 2021 Christian Writers Market Guide and their online version are available, as is the Children's Writers and Illustrators Market. And there's also a novel and short story writers market, and the Poets Market, and the Guide to the Literary Agents. And I understand this in a way because one huge problem for the print versions is that by the time the current markets are available, and that they have gathered and printed, and they are often no longer current. When possible, the online version should be accessed because they should be easier to keep up to date. However, I still encourage you to start there, but do your own current online research before submitting. You don't want to tick off an editor who's receiving solicitations addressed to a previous editor. The next one on here is Poets and Writers Magazine and their online markets. So check out their website for subscription information. They were founded in 1970, so they've been around for a while. And their calendars for opportunities are also published in their monthly print magazines for contests and publication requests, as well as available grants and awards.
So Submissions Grinder is an online search engine, and it digs into prose and poetry, and I believe it gets into some subgenres as well. So it filters out some of the noise for you, and it offers an idea of turnaround for review, and that's based on self-reporting. And so if you do use that, please do self-report back so that they can make sure that they're keeping their data accurate. Submittable is a free account, and it will help you not only manage your submissions, but also discover new opportunities. Again, you just want to be sure to follow those specific guidelines because they can be quite different. It's the publication that's setting the guidelines for it, not submission itself. I don't know a lot about Duotrope. It was launched in 2005, but it's a resource for writers and other creatives. And in addition to opportunities, they have submission trackers as well as agent listings, and it's a paid service. Then Facebook and Instagram, this is a place where I find a lot of opportunities lately. They pop up in my news feed because I have been following or saving others, and sometimes I see what some of my Facebook friends are liking, and I discover things. Authors Publish, I mentioned a story, an article in there earlier. That's a free subscription. You get a daily email, and it has information about a variety of opportunities across genres and subgenres. And it also includes workshop notices, educational booklets, and career advice.
And Carrie just put a message in the chat that she's been using Duotrope for years. So you can ask her about her experiences with that. Almond Press, I'm not familiar with them. I just, something that popped up when I was doing some research for this program. They're an independent publisher of dystopian and apocalyptic short fiction. So when I saw that, I thought maybe some of the writers here would be interested in that. And so I've included that. The Right Life, again, I don't know anything about them except this research, but I liked the idea that they say that they have 40 free writing contests, legitimate competitions with cash prizes. But again, do your homework. And Winning Writers I've heard of over the years, and they list their own contests and a subscription for best free literary contests. Also consider some of the local, regional, and national contests like AAG and our affiliate Virginia Writers Club. The AAG anthology is a good way to get a publication credit or to establish yourself as an Appalachian author. And a contest can be a good way to get prizes and get published. Also, watch Vicki's messages because in the newsletter and also in her messages, she's been offering some opportunities. And I know that there's a Knoxville Writers Guild for anyone else that's in Tennessee, and they've been having an annual literary contest. The Lost State Writers Guild has had an anthology before, and hopefully they'll do that again. And then I wanted to just mention the National League of American Pen Women. They have been around a long, long, long time. I'm sorry, guys, it's just for women. So they're a little bit exclusive. And I looked to see how many were in Tennessee and Virginia. There's one branch in Nashville and one in Alexandria and Chesapeake Bay branches in Virginia, and 27 other states. Their competitions are in art, letters, and music, and they have been associated since 1921. And a little bit before my time, I had been, that's 1921, that's a little bit before my time. I had been a member of the League for several years in 2 states. It was the first time I felt like a professional writer. Unfortunately, both chapters have now folded. But the national organization does publish the Pen Women magazine, which usually includes member contests. And I have had at least one poem that I remember, it was a haiku contest. And so it's been published in there. And the League's headquarters are located in the historic Penn Arts Building and Art Museum in the DuPont Circle area of Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity when I worked in D.C. to go there. But I have been with Tennessee Mountain Writers, and they have an annual workshop every year. And they also have contests for humor, nonfiction poetry. And that's usually an April deadline, if I remember correctly.
Thanks, Rose. Looking to the poetry here, the Poetry Society of Tennessee has members only contests for their full members, roughly monthly, and then they have annual contests. There's about 25 of them, and they have, in addition to adult contests, some student contests for grades 2nd through 12th. And some of these contests are available for non-members or associate members. You can just go to poetrysocietytennessee.org to learn more.
Great. And speaking of the students, some of the PST contests for students, the winners for this state have been passed on to NFSPS. And we have a teacher in our area that has a student that has placed in that. So we're very proud of that. And since several of you are probably Virginia residents, I thought maybe, I didn't know if you were knowledgeable that there is a Poetry Society of Virginia. They're not part of the NFSPS. It's my understanding that they were years ago, but they actually predated NFSPS. And they have an annual contest. Years ago, I was a member, and twice I've attended their poetry contest award ceremonies in Richmond, Virginia. So I think that's probably their home base.
And the National Federation of State Poetry Society holds several contests. Some are for members only. Some are open to anyone, and they have 50 or more contests annually. In addition to those, they have the Blackberry Peach Award, which is for spoken and heard poetry. So if you are a spoken word poet or you know someone who does spoken word poetry, if it's really good written, it can get through the gate and get into the spoken category there. They have a college undergraduate poetry competition for college students. And Rose mentioned the student contest that they had for 2nd through 12th. It's the Manningham Trust Student Poetry Contest. And they also hold a Stevens Poetry Manuscript Competition.
And NFSPS also posts links to about 30 other state organizations. And I think maybe Lisa touched on this earlier, that remember, if the state organization's contest rules say members only, that means membership in their state organizations. But there are usually categories which allow non-member submissions.
All right, and more opportunities.
Well, I suggest you also check the local colleges and universities. They may include non-student entries like The Howl, a literary and art review from Virginia Highlands Community College. I was not a student when I entered and was published in their journal. Some colleges allow auditing classes. Then you could be eligible to enter their annual solicitations, like Northeast State Community College in Bloomfield, Tennessee's Echoes and Images, where I was published as an auditing student.
And ETSU may have retired now and then, if you're familiar with that, but they have a new journal, Appalachian Places, that's going to launch soon. And I think they're taking submissions, even though they haven't made an official call for submissions right now. And then Lincoln Memorial University, they have the Mountain Heritage Literary Festival annually, and there's some contests and awards associated with that. Walter State Community College has the Mildred Hahn Review, a journal of Appalachian art, culture, and scholarship. And in addition, the college also sponsors a festival annually.
And 2 of our PST-NE members have become editors for an online publication known as Black Moon Magazine. It includes poetry and prose. Their information is on their website, and both Lisa and I, plus another PST-NE member, Ben Weekly, have poems published in their just released 3rd issue. According to their website, now through September 30th, they are requesting the theme Blood Moon for submissions. But maybe you might enjoy that.
Yeah, that sounds really spooky. And I know ghost stories go over really well in this area, so I can't wait to see what that issue is going to look like. Another thing that you may not be aware of is PST-NE on our blog. We publish contest and submission information. And while our focus is poetry, often the journals and contests that we are publishing have an interest in prose or other entries. And I wanted to mention one other journal, Ekphrastic Review, which has been very closely tied with poetry over the years, is now branching out, and they are very much interested in art-inspired prose and hybrid forms and the like. So again, hybrid forms and prose right now.
That's great. And I've said this before, you can find markets for the writers you like in journals. Read their bios on issues where they have published. And you may also consider submitting to those same markets.
And don't forget to check our blog.
Yeah, don't forget our blog. So I think the chat has some comments in there. Do we want to go there and see whether or not there's some questions for us, or how do we want to do this?
Let's see if I can. Okay, we've got, let me see, bear with me. I'm going to have to exit out of this presentation if I can, so that I can, my mouse for some reason is not operating very well when I have it in presentation mode. So we've got a number of folks who said that they are strictly prose, but love poetry or admire poets. And if anyone is interested in learning more about duotrope, Carrie Kilgore has been using it for years. So I know we've been talking for quite some time. If you want to stand up for a minute and stretch, please do so. And we'll be happy to take any of your questions. And Rose, I have a feeling you might have questions for them too, huh?
Yeah.
Ladies, I want to take a moment to thank you for doing the presentation today.
Absolutely.
Thank
Our
you.
pleasure. So don't hear any questions. Has anybody in the room said any questions? Vicki?
Any questions? No
Nope.
questions. I had one comment says very thorough. So thank
Okay.
you so much for providing all that information.
Absolutely.
I'd like to mention another market real quick. There's one called Sylvia Magazine. It's out of Great Britain. That they're closed right now for submissions. They normally do poetry, but they did publish one of my prose pieces this past year, and their pay rate is excellent. It's like 25 pence a word, which came out to a very nice, yeah, not cents, but pence. It's in pounds, but still, I've got the link in the chat. It's just sylviamagazine.com. So when they reopen, that's worth looking at for shorter prose pieces and poetry.
Great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carrie.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have something that they're using to find opportunities that they'd like to share?
I'm on Facebook with a couple of writers groups, and they're really good to post, you know, when there's contests coming up.
Well, that's fantastic. And I imagine some of those may make their way to your newsletters and other info that you send out to AAG.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Let's see, you turned off your slides, didn't you?
I did. I can put them back on.
No, that's okay. It's just a thank you one.
Yeah.
But we do hope that this information we presented today will help you as you explore new opportunities for contests and journal submissions. So
we wish you the best of luck.
Absolutely.
Oh, thanks. And in the chat, Carrie has shared the piece that was published in Sylvia. Thanks, Carrie. And Carrie, you're going to save the chat, right? Excellent. All right.
I will. Yes.
Thank you both again. We appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and we hope that there's at least one tidbit that you can take away that will help you in your personal goals for writing.
Yes, definitely.
And if you have any other questions about the society, Linda Hoagland and Vicky are both members of our society. So that's, yay. Okay. So we'll turn it over to you, whatever you need to do next, Vicky.
All right. I think we're ready to close out, Miss Carrie. Hopefully everything's recorded correctly and we'll be able to get that link set out for people to watch.
Beautiful.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. This was really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.